Hey guys, tonight we're heading back to a time when fashion could quite literally get you killed. Picture it, you're walking down a narrow, muddy street in your best outfit. The air smells like chimney soot, overripe fruit, and just a whisper of cow children dart past. Someone's shouting about turnips, and the castle bells are tolling in the distance. But the real drama? You're wearing purple. And suddenly, you become a walking offense to divine order. So, before you get too comfy, do this. Like the video and subscribe if you enjoyed this kind of content. And hey, tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? And what time is it for you right now? Turn off the lights, grab a cozy blanket, and get ready, 'cause our journey tonight is about to begin. Your robe is a deep plum velvet, stitched with gold thread. Maybe you thought it looked regal, and that's the problem. Because in the Middle Ages, what you wore wasn't just about fashion, it was about class, power, and divine hierarchy. Purple, especially that rich Tyrian hue, was reserved for royalty or high-ranking clergy. If you weren't either of those things, wearing it was like showing up to your boss's house wearing their bathrobe, disrespectful, suspicious, and a little deranged. You think you're just expressing yourself. The villagers think you're possessed by pride or worse, trying to impersonate nobility, and that's a punishable offense. The local bishops having a bad day, or the town's hungry for a scapegoat, your luxurious wardrobe could earn you a very hot date with firewood. Historians still argue whether sumptuary laws were strictly enforced or just symbolic tools of control. Either way, everyone believed in them. That belief made them real. It wasn't just about clothes, it was about knowing your place. You, dressed in kingly colors, were stepping out of yours. Sumptuary laws were the medieval way of saying, don't get ideas. They dictated who could wear silk, velvet, fur, and even specific sleeve widths. Yes, sleeves. Too long, too drapey, it's heretic chic. These laws reinforced a rigid social order where everyone, from the plowman to the priest, could identify your rank at a glance. If you blurred those lines, people got twitchy. Let's be honest, in a world where most people owned two outfits, one for working and one for dying in, you stood out. And standing out was dangerous. If there was a crop failure, a strange illness, or even just a spat between neighbors, your noble attire could be seen as suspicious. Who does she think she is? They'd murmur. How would a peasant wear cloth finer than the Lord's own scribe? And that's when the rumors start. You're not just stylish, you're vain, you're proud. You've got delusions of grandeur. Okay, maybe, just maybe, you got that wealth from unholy sources. One real-world example. The English sumptuary laws of 1363 under Edward III, which dictated exactly who could wear what based on social class. Velvet was restricted to earls and above. Silk and foreign cloth forbidden to yeomen. Even servants had dress codes, lest they start swaggering too confidently around the manor. But it wasn't just about your station, it was about spiritual safety. The church saw extravagance as a gateway drug to sin, looking too good. Vanity. Vanity leads to pride. Pride leads to rebellion. And rebellion, well, clearly you've been whispering with demons. The fringe belief? Some chroniclers thought certain colors could corrupt the soul. Deep dyes, especially rare ones like indigo or Tyrian purple, were seen as too worldly. Wearing them was like tattooing, I have dark intentions across your forehead. And if you were a woman, oh dear, a woman in vibrant, expensive colors might be labeled a temptress. It's the medieval logic train. Red dress gives lustful thoughts, gives fall of man gives. Fire, whoops, you tried to explain that it was a hand-me-down, that you inherited it, that your cousin brought it from the market at a discount. Me, but nobody cares. Because a well-dressed commoner in the 14th century doesn't just offend sensibilities, they upset the divine order. And this was an era obsessed with divine order. Everything had its place. The stars, the kings, the sheep pew. If you stepped outside your God-given lane, even with something as simple as cloth, it threatened the entire worldview. Better to burn one flashy sinner than let the rot spread. You think that's dramatic? Welcome to medieval justice. It's not about proportion, it's about purification. Burning wasn't always about punishment. Tit was about cleansing the community of spiritual infection, like bleach. On fire. Imagine standing in the town square, your hands bound, your once gorgeous robe now kindling for your own execution. The villagers look on with a strange mix of fear and relief. After all, you brought this on yourself, right? But you'd have stuck with brown wool and minding your own business. A small child clutches their mother and whispers, "Why are they burning her? She wore the color of kings," comes the reply. The child nods, wide-eyed, lesson learned. But hey, at least, you looked incredible. You're still warm from the last incident, probably literally, but now you're back in a village square, trying to keep a low profile. Unfortunately, today, you speak. Just a little comment, tiny musing about how the clouds look ominous, or maybe that the harvest seems late this year. You say it to no one in particular, maybe to your neighbor, maybe just under your breath, but someone hears. Someone always hears. And now you've drawn attention, not for what you said, but for the fact that you said it. You see, in the Middle Ages, speech wasn't casual. It was a tool, and a dangerous one at that. Speaking too freely, especially as someone not of noble or clerical rank, was seen as both uppity and potentially heretical. It's the wrong word. Even something as innocent as funny, whether we're having, could be interpreted as challenging divine will. If God controls the weather, and you're commenting on it like it's your neighbor's sheep being unruly, well, that smells like I'm petty. It doesn't help that you phrased it a bit too cleverly. You made a joke. People laughed. Someone didn't. And now that someone is whispering to the town priest that you mocked the Almighty, historians still argue whether heresy trials were primarily about religious conformity or political control. But in practice, it's both meant bad news for anyone with a sharp tongue. Even a casual remark could be taken as evidence of hidden beliefs, suspect affiliations, or just general insolence. Remember, in this society, silence is golden. Literally keeps you alive. The Inquisition wasn't just about rooting out witches and devil worshippers. It was about rooting out dissent. You weren't allowed to question the church, its teachings, or its representatives. But the definition of questioning was dangerously flexible. Were you raising an eyebrow when the priest stumbled over a reading? Did you laugh when the bishop tripped on his robe? Careful, that's sarcasm, that's defiance. That's suspicious. There's a famous case, though not as flashy as Joan of Arc's, that involved a simple farmer in 14th century France. He complained about how long the church bell rang one evening. He was tired, the cows needed tending, and the bell was loud. The next week, he was brought before a local tribunal for undermining ecclesiastical authority. He got off with penance and public humiliation, but if he'd said it during a famine year, the firewood would have stacked itself. And here's a quirky detail. The church believed that demons could speak through people without them realizing it. So if your joke came off a little too blasphemous, it might not have been you speaking at all. But the solution wasn't exorcism, it was elimination. Just in case, even silence could be dangerous. If a heretical idea was floated nearby, someone questioning the Trinity, or suggesting that saints weren't all that special, and you didn't speak up to denounce it, that was complicity. You could be charged with silent heresy, a kind of spiritual treason by omission. Talk too much or talk too little, and you're toast. It's like playing a game where all the rules are invisible and the penalty is always fire. You might be thinking, well, surely this would have happened to someone respectable, okay? But your respectability is not up to you. It's decided by your neighbors, and they're not exactly impartial. Maybe you borrowed someone's goat and forgot to return it. Maybe you declined to share your barley stew at last week's feast. It's that old woman with the squint and the impressive collection of grudges. She's ready. She remembers. She tells the priest she heard you mocking the Angelus bells. She says you laughed at the way he blesses the bread. You definitely once claimed the village relic of saint's toenail looked like a chicken bone. That's enough. A few villagers are asked to give witness. Most are too scared to lie, but one nods, unsure, and then everyone else nods, because that's safer. Suddenly, you're not a clever witch or a cunning heretic. You're dragged in front of the bishop's panel tent, and now it's serious. You try to explain. You say it was a joke. But jokes are tricky here. Humor isn't just misunderstood. It's considered suspicious. The devil is clever, after all. And you might be clever too. That's not a compliment. They ask if you believe everything the church teaches. You say yes, of course. But your voice trembles. Someone notes that. A scribe jots it down. Someone else says you hesitated a beat too long before answering. Another note. The mood in the room curdles. There's no need for physical evidence, just suspicion, testimonies, vibes, really. In this era, feelings can get you condemned. And your neighbors are feeling weird about you. And then comes the part you really didn't expect. Your own words are used against you. That time you muttered something about the harvest being late. That becomes, he accused God of neglecting the land. When you joked that the bishop's hat looked like a pastry, he mocked the sacred vestments. Suddenly, your mouth, once your best asset, is your worst enemy, the fringe belief. Some medieval preachers taught that laughter itself was sinful. There were even sermons that claimed Jesus never laughed, and if the Son of God didn't crack a smile. Who are you to be making wisecracks? So there you are, gagged in the name of piety, punished for a voice that was a little too bright, a little too bold, a little too human. Because in a world where truth is dictated from a pulpit and written in Latin, your little one-liner was enough to tilt the scales as they escort you from the courtroom to the holding cell tap. Stark and inexplicably, smelling of turnips, you wonder if it was worth it. That joke about the wind, honestly, it wasn't even your best material. You've learned your lesson about joking kind of. Now you're quieter, more cautious, more fragrant. That's right, you bathed. And not just the once. You've made a little habit of it. You like how it feels when your skin doesn't crunch, your hair doesn't smell like old cheese. You've discovered rosemary, lavender, and mentand, even worse. You've got the gall to smell pleasant in a world where people are expected to reek of wet wool and wood smoke. You think you're being hygienic. The village thinks you're hiding something. Bathing too often in the Middle Ages wasn't just oddity, was suspicious. Dirt, after all, was considered a kind of moral armor, okay? Being earthy wasn't just normal, it was holy. Cleanliness was indulgent, effeminate, foreign, dangerous. Let's set the scene. You've cobbled together a tub in your cottage. Maybe you heat water over the hearth, toss in a sprig of sage, and settle in with a blissful sigh. The steam rises. Your muscles relax. You hum softly to yourself. Across the road, someone sees the smoke curling from your chimney and assumes, reasonably, that you are conducting some kind of demonic ritual. The local priest swings by and peers into your window. He sees the glint of the water, the gleam of your skin. Okay, most damning of all the candles. Congratulations, you've just recreated a scene straight from the church's nightmare pamphlets. A bather, alone, stewing in vanity, conjuring unclean spirits with heat and herbs. Historians still argue whether medieval people bathed more than the stereotypes suggest. Public bathhouses certainly existed in cities. Nobles bathed, monks had strict cleanliness rules, and records show bathhouse usage until the church began to frown on it. Once plagues rolled through and bathhouses were blamed for spreading disease and moral decay. Washing fell out of favor. Public nudity, scented oils, mixed gender bathing, too Roman, too pagan, it's too risky. You, dear listener, are ahead of your time. You enjoy smelling like lemon balm and looking moderately alive. But that puts you squarely in the danger zone, the fringe belief. Some theologians argued that cleanliness invited sin. They claimed devils were drawn to smooth, soft skin. When you scrape the grime off your body, you also peeled away your spiritual defenses. Dirt was humble. Sweat was holy. Spotless body was a slippery slope to pride. And pride is just step one on the 8-lane highway to heresy. Your neighbors, many of whom haven't washed their legs in 2 decades, start talking. The widow next door insists she saw steam demons floating from your chimney. A tanner says, you smell like a noblewoman, and no peasant has any business smelling like anything but leather and despair. One brave soul confronts you in the market. Why do you always look so clean? You reply, because I wash. Wrong answer. The correct response was probably, I don't. I roll in pigsty like everyone else. It's even worse. Someone finds out you've been mixing your own soaps. You've dabbled with ash, goat fat, a few petals from the monastery garden. You say it's just for fun, but to them, it looks like alchemy. Say you use honey on your face, and they're halfway to an exorcism. Back at church, the sermon gets oddly specific. The priest warns against vanity, indulgence, and those who think themselves above others with their scented skin. People start turning to look at you. Even the church cat glares suspiciously. This isn't just social snubbing anymore. You've been marked. You're no longer just a clean one. You're the one who thinks they're better, who hides their filth like someone hiding sin, who might be bathing, not to be pure, but to prepare for some dark ritual. And remember, this is a time when spiritual rot is expected to be mirrored by physical rot. If you're too clean, what are you hiding? It's almost like you knew to cleanse something, like guilt, or a pact with a faint brimstone scent of treason. You recall hearing that St. Agnes bathed only in tears. St. Francis rolled in snow to battle temptation. And you lit beeswax candles and hummed while scrubbing your armpits. You monster, you tried to backpedal. You wear your old tunic again. You smear a bit of soot on your cheeks. You loudly proclaim your love of mud. But it's too late. The Whisper Network has been activated. Someone claims their cow stopped giving milk after walking past your herb garden. Someone else says your sparkling fingernails cursed their son with hiccups. And one poor fool insists you bewitched his wife just by smelling better than him. The accusations begin piling up. She always smells of roses, and naturally so. She was seen bathing on a Wednesday, the devil's half-holiday. She boils things. No one should boil things unless it's cabbage or sinners. Eventually, you find yourself in a room with too many candles and too few allies. You try to explain. You speak calmly. I just wanted to be clean, you say. The inquisitor nods slowly. And what were you washing away? You don't have a good answer, because anything you say will sound like a confession. And besides, they've already made up their minds. You were too clean for too long. And now, ironically, they want to purge you as they march you toward your judgment. The townsfolk fall silent. A baby cries. Someone whispers, she always did smell of strange flowers. And you wonder if, in the end, it might have been better to just embrace the funk. You're standing in a cramped village chapel, trying to disappear into the carved shadows and musty incense. You've stopped talking. You've stopped bathing, But now you make the mistake of reading. Not aloud, not anything flashy, Just reading quietly in the back corner of a room that smells like beeswax and damp wood. And that, somehow, is worse, because books in the Middle Ages. They aren't just heavy, they're holy. They are rare, handwritten, and guarded with the kind of reverence usually reserved for saints' teeth. To even be seen with a book, if you're not a priest or a noble, is to raise questions. Who taught you? What are you reading? Why aren't you afraid of it? You're holding a worn Latin prayer book, something you found in your late uncle's trunk. You don't even understand half of it, but it's comforting. The pages are soft from years of turning. The ink is faded, and there's a doodle of a donkey in the margins. You didn't draw it. Maybe your uncle didn't either, but now it's yours. Unfortunately, forgot the golden rule of survival in the Middle Ages. Don't look too clever. A passing friar sees you squinting at a page and stops dead. You look up and smile. Your first mistake. He narrows his eyes, takes the book, and starts asking questions. Where did you get it? Why do you have it? Do you know what you're really reading? You say it's a prayer book. He flips through the pages, sees the Latin, and raises an eyebrow. You read Latin? You don't. Not well, but you stammer something about learning a little from the monastery. Clerk, when you were young, he owed your father a favor. Big mistake. Now you're not just suspicious, sure and educated. Historians still argue whether medieval lay people were truly forbidden from reading scripture or just discouraged. But one thing's certain, literacy among common folk, especially women, was often treated with unease. Reading was a gate, and who knows what ideas might sneak through that gate if you left it open. You're questioned, probed. What else do you read? Who taught you to write? Do you believe the church is wrong about anything? You say no, of course not, but they've already found a marginal note that could be interpreted as criticism of a local priest's sermon. You didn't write it, but again, someone always did. There's a mainstream fact for you. In the 13th century, Pope Gregory IX established a formal system of inquisitors. Their job was to root out heresy, and they had a particular dislike for people who read the wrong text, not just heretical tomes, but even folk remedies, obscure theology, or unsanctioned translations of the Bible. And guess what? The French books almost always started as hand-copied experiments passed around, whispered about, and eventually burned. Along with their owners, you tried to protest. You show them the book. You point out it's just prayers and psalms. Then someone asks why there's a bookmark on a page about cleansing fire. It's a coincidence, but they don't believe in those. You're brought before a panel. The room smells like mildew and fear. The inquisitor flips through your book again, reads a few lines aloud, and then declares that some interpretations of these words could be dangerous. Not that you said them, but the possibility is enough. They ask if you've read anything else. You panic. You mention a book of remedies, old wives' cures. You say, another mistake. Now, it's not just heresy, it's witchcraft. They search your home. They find a little sachet of dried herbs your aunt gave you for headaches. They find your bundle of quills and ink. They find the poem you copied into the margins of a wood ledger. You thought it was pretty. They think it's a spell. The fringe tidbit. Some medieval scholars believed that certain books had lives of their own, that the ink could change meanings over time, that the margins were spaces where devils whispered. Your book looked well-worn. It was used. It looked pristine. It was hiding something. There was no winning. Your hands are ink-stained. Your eyes are a little too curious. Your words are just a little too well-formed. And that's more than enough. The townsfolk are called in. Some of them have never seen you with a book before. Some say they have. One claims you once recited from memory, though he might be thinking of that time you hummed to him while feeding chickens. Still, the questions swirl. If you can read, what else can you do? If you can read Latin, could you forge documents? Could you summon spirits? Could you lie about what the Bible really says? Okay. You shake your head. You insist it was just curiosity. But curiosity in this time is not innocent. It's a spark. in a world soaked in dry suspicion. Sparks don't last long before they become flames. You're ordered to publicly surrender your books. They are burned, of course, an act of purification. The crowd watches silently as the pages curl and blacken, little Latin letters warping in the heat like condemned souls. One friar tells you, as the flames rise, better the book than the reader. You smile, unsure if that's a reprieve or a threat. But the next time you walk into the chapel, you feel the eyes on you. You smell the fear, not your fear theirs. Fear that you might understand something they don't, that you've seen inside the margins, that you know too much. You've stopped speaking. You've stopped washing. Now, it seems, you must stop knowing. You keep your head down after the book burning. You avoid eye contact, nod solemnly in church, and never touch ink again, at least not in public. But now you're making another mistake. This one seems even smaller. You care for people. You help. And here in the Middle Ages, that, believe it or not, could get you killed. It starts simply enough. A neighbor's child comes down with a fever. You offer them a warm drink made with elderflower and willow bark. You learn the combination from your aunt, who learned it from her grandmother, who claimed to dream the recipe during a thunderstorm. The child recovers. People smile at you in the market. For a while, it feels nice, too nice. You help a pregnant woman through a rough labor using hot cloths and herbal compresses. You rub vinegar into an old man's joints. You show a young girl how to stop a nosebleed with nettle and prayer. You don't think twice about any of it. These are just things people in your family have always done. Small acts, shared knowledge, kindness, but not everyone sees it that way. A chicken dies in the next village. A baby is born with a twisted foot. A man dreams of a wolf every night. None of these things are your fault, of course, but coincidence has no place. In a medieval mind, trained to see divine cause in everything, and so the whispers return. She's too good with sickness. God gives ailments for a reason. Who is she to interfere? My cousin took her root potion and started talking in his sleep. It doesn't help that your treatments actually work. That's always the most suspicious part. It's healing without invoking a saint or paying the parish priest. That's unnatural. Your neighbors are torn between gratitude and fear. You remind them of the village wise women who always lived on the edge of things, useful, until suddenly it's too useful. Historians still argue whether folk healers were truly feared or simply tolerated until it became politically inconvenient. In many communities, these figures, usually women, were respected. But in times of stress, famine, or disease, respect turned to dread faster than you can boil a poultice. There's a mainstream fact you should know. In 1320, a woman named Angelique of Saint Maur was burned for treating the sick with unnatural means. Her unnatural means, a mix of honey, ash, and poppy juice. People said it worked too well, that the sick turned too quickly and returned to work as if nothing had happened. That kind of recovery was suspicious, almost demonic. You know that feeling now. You walk down the lane and people step back, but politely. No longer hostile, just careful. It's too careful. You try to explain yourself. You say, it's not magic, just knowledge. You learn from women who learned from women. Doesn't help. Lines, they call those generations of knowledge passed in secret. They imagine whispered curses over boiling pots, nighttime ceremonies, skin-bound books filled with dark recipes. It doesn't matter that the most exotic thing you've ever done is mash garlic with butter to cure chest pain. Someone still reports. Soon, the local bailiff comes with 2 men and a list of questions. Why were you seen carrying dried herbs to the churchyard? You were placing lavender at your brother's grave. Why do you keep a bundle of yarrow above your door? To keep flies away. Why did you tell a woman to drink water with ash when her stomach was upset? It works. These aren't crimes, but they're not normal either. And the line between odd and dangerous here is as thin as a reed. One of the men more curious than Krul asks what you used to cure fever. You list the ingredients: willow bark, vinegar, mint. He nods, but the other man interrupts. That's not healing. That's alchemy. Alchemy, a word with weight. Word that means mixing things you're not meant to mix. Word that can turn honey and herbs into forbidden knowledge. And forbidden knowledge, in this age, is often just a heartbeat away from heresy. And here's the fringe tidbit. Some medieval physicians, especially those trained in distant lands, knew that willow bark helped reduce pain. But if you, a peasant, knew that, suddenly it wasn't medicine, it was meddling. Knowledge from below was distrusted, feared. Uphill knowledge, passed from monk to scholar to noble, was sanctioned. Your hands are too rough, too brown with dirt to be trusted with that kind of wisdom. So they investigate further. They search your home again. This time, they're not looking for books. They're looking for evidence of healing. Just to say, anything they find. A jar of honey with thyme sprigs floating inside. A cloth pouch containing fennel seeds. A stone bowl crusted with ash and oil. None of it is incriminating to you. But when the Inquisitor smells the honey, he frowns. Why sweeten something if it's not a potion? He asks. You don't. Laugh. You know better by now. The townspeople are called to testify. Some defend you. A few say you helped him. But even those who speak well of you do more harm than good. She cured my son when even the priest couldn't. Outperformed. Clergy that never plays well. You are asked to demonstrate your methods. You grind a few herbs, speak softly about inflammation, mention the way certain smells can calm the spirit. You make a tea, you offer it, no one drinks it. One man asks, do you pray when you brew this? You say yes, of course. He nods. To which God? That's all it takes. The door creaks open for suspicion. Maybe your God is not theirs. Maybe your knowledge comes from somewhere darker, deeper, older. That's when they find your garden. Not a mystical grove, not a cursed bog, just your back patch of soil, planted with care. Mugwort, rue, marigold, sage, and yes, a few red poppies. It's beautiful, too beautiful. The devil loves flowers, Swan mutters. And that's it. They say you've been growing poisons, that your poppies are not medicine, but sedatives used in unholy rites, that your rosemary bush is for summoning spirits, that your mint plant was once seen twitching in the wind when there was no breeze. They call it witchcraft by garden. And you try to smile, to shake your head. You say again, it's just tradition, but tradition, when untethered from church or guild, becomes folklore. And folklore, when handled by the wrong person, becomes heresy. They drag you back into the chapel. This time, they don't ask questions. They recite a list. You cured without blessing. You used roots without license. You grew herbs too close to consecrated ground. You made potions, encouraged others to trust your hand over God's will. Nod, slowly, sadly, because you know what's coming next. They call you the wise one, and they say it like it's a curse. So now they've labeled you the wise one. Not healer, not helper wise. And in the Middle Ages, wisdom that doesn't come from scripture or sanctioned study is deeply suspicious. It's not reverence. They offer you it, a noose in disguise. The term wise woman sounds flattering by today's standards, but in your time, it's code for something far more dangerous. It means you know things and not the right kinds of things. It's not theological things, not noble things. You know how to ease childbirth, soothe fevers, predict weather from the wind. You can tell a man's mood by the way his dog follows him. You listen when others don't. You see, and seeing too much That gets you burned. At first, your neighbors look at you like a puzzle. Now they look at you like a warning. You sense it in the silence when you pass the well, in the way children, once eager for your honey lozenges, now hide behind skirts. In the priest's eyes, when he mentions false prophets who masquerade as servants, it might help to be a man, or rich, or ordained. But you're none of those. Here's a mainstream fact. In the 15th century, Conrad Kramer authored the Malleus Maleficarum, the infamous witch-hunting manual. In it, he claimed that women are more prone to witchcraft due to their loose tongues, deceitful minds, and impressionable flesh. He wasn't French, he was a Dominican inquisitor. His book would become standard reading for centuries. Fun bedtime stuff. And you've done everything wrong. You've helped them. Sick. You've read a little. You've grown herbs. You're calm when they expect hysteria. You're silent when they hope for confession. You dream too often. You walk at dusk. You talk to animals. You don't talk enough to people. They start asking about your dreams now. Do you see shapes in them? Colors? Did you dream about a death before it happened? You hesitate. You say yes. Once, a boy drowned in the river. You dreamed of water for days before it happened. You didn't think anything of it until after. That's all they need to hear. Now, you're not just wise, you're clairvoyant. And clairvoyant is just the soft prelude to possessed. Historians still argue whether these trials were genuine mass hysteria or calculated social control. But the pattern is always the same. A woman becomes indispensable. She becomes inconvenient. Then she becomes unholy. You hear a new accusation whispered in the square. You speak to spirits. It's not true. But you did once mention your dreams of your grandmother. She came to you in sleep and reminded you to hang dried chamomile too. Keep away mildew. You meant it affectionately. Someone else took it literally, and once a spirit is mentioned, people began connecting dots that were never part of the same page. They say you live too close to the woods. You walk barefoot in morning dew, clearly a sign of witchcraft. You talk to birds. Cat understood you once. The cat was black. Cat, you didn't even own it. There's a French tidbit for you. Some inquisitors in early Germany believed cats were not just familiars, but witches in alternate form, souls who could step into animal shapes at will. So even being near such a cat was enough to mark you for suspicion. And now you remember that one morning, the same black cat walked across the chapel steps. It paused and looked at you. You smiled. That moment has probably been told and retold a dozen times by now, twisted into something malevolent. You try to keep living as normally as possible. You draw water, you sweep. You don't pick flowers. Anymore, you let your herbs wither. You refuse to answer when someone asks how to calm a cough. But even that short silence now gets interpreted as guilt. They say witches are clever. They hide when threatened. That silence is their trickiest spell. Eventually, they stop whispering. They come to your door. Not a mob, but a procession, led by the local priest, followed by 2 guards and several villagers you once helped. There's no torchlight, no chains. It's just the quiet weight of finality. The priest asks if you'll come peacefully to the rectory for questioning. You do. Walk with them. You notice someone has brought your old prayer book, the one that wasn't burned. Someone must have fished it from the ashes before it was fully gone. It's charred on the corners now, half legible. The page they show has a smudge in the margin next to a song about rising smoke. They say it's symbolic. You are brought into a wooden chamber lined with straw, a window that's in a single square of light. You sit, you wait. You do not ask for water. Eventually, the questions begin again. This time, they don't ask what you did. They ask why, as if your entire life has been a plot. Why did you heal that woman's leg? Why did you dream about the drowning? Why did you choose to learn from your aunt? Why were you always alone? You don't know how to answer. You never chose this. You only tried to help, but in the Inquisitor's voice, help is just another word for manipulate. You're presented with a list of items found in your house. A wax figure of Saint Apollonia, a scrap of red cloth tucked under your mattress, a circle drawn in ash beneath your hearthstone. You try to explain. The wax figure was a devotional candle. The cloth was for a toothache remedy. The ash circle you've never even seen. It may be your cousin dropped soot when lighting the fire, but they nod slowly. That's what she claims. Someone murmurs. You begin to understand that no matter how you explain yourself, everything is being reinterpreted through a lens of fear. Like watching someone build a cage around you, piece by piece, using only your daily habits. They bring in a witness, a girl who once watched you crush berries with a stone. Psst, she says, the juice stained your hands like blood. Psst, says, you murmured something under your breath. You were probably just counting, but it's recorded as incantation. And then, because they must, they asked the final question. Do you renounce the devil? You blink. You never even met the devil. But this is not a question with a real answer. Say yes, and you confirm guilt. Say no, and they say, you're protecting him. You mumble something about the Lord, about healing in his name. They don't seem satisfied. The priest closes the book. The Inquisitor sighs. They begin drafting your confession for you, of course, because you may not understand the gravity of your own words. They will say you served dark forces, that you bewitched the livestock, that you turned rain clouds with song, that you gathered plants beneath the full moon, that you knew things no woman should know, and whether you sign it or not, they've already decided the ending. You don't sleep that night. It's not the cold floor, or the thin blanket, or the way the straw stings your elbows when you shift. It's the silence. It's that peculiar, thick silence that presses in once you realize your life is no longer your own. Outside, the village exhales like nothing's wrong. Crickets chirp. The moon rises. A dog barks once and is quiet. But inside your chest, a thunderstorm. You feel each beat of your heart like a knock on the door that no one is answering down. The morning, they bring you a crust of bread and a small cup of broth. The woman who brings it won't look you in the eye. You remember braiding her daughter's hair when the girl had lice. You'd mixed vinegar and rosemary, made a charm for under her pillow. She'd slept for the first time in a week, she thought. That meant something. Apparently, not enough. After your meal it can be called that the priest returns. His hands are folded, face calm, almost fatherly. He begins to speak softly, as if comforting a child. Confession is cleansing. The soul cannot reach heaven, weighed down with secrets. You want to ask what secret you're supposed to have, but you don't. You've already learned that questions make things worse. Questions are too close to cleverness. Cleverness is too close to cunning. And cunning, well, that's the devil's playground. So instead, you listen to his rehearsed lines, to his distant gaze, to the gentle scratching of a quill beside him as another monk takes notes. Dan, not writing what you say, Gan, writing what they plan to make you say. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Between the 15th and 17th centuries, confessions were often extracted before the accused even knew what they were confessing to. Torture chambers weren't always dungeons with racks and thumbscrews, though those existed. Sometimes it was just a small room like this one, with nothing but time, pressure, and the erosion of your will. You're asked again about your dreams. Did you ever see a shadow in them? A man, a figure without eyes, a goat with hooves that bled ink? The questions become specific, like someone is feeding them a script. You say no, then maybe. You hesitate. You try to remember, and your hesitation becomes proof. Ah, they say. See, she remembers. You want to laugh? Instead, you nod, because at this point, what else can you do? They bring in an object wrapped in lino, a tool you once used to scoop beeswax. They call it a wand. Someone saw you flick it through the air once when chasing off a swarm. Another witness, this time a boy, says he saw you talking to the wind. You remember the day clearly. It was market day, and the storm had come early. You'd muttered something about the clouds while bringing your cart under a tree. That was all. But now it's legend. They start using the word coven. You don't belong to one. You don't even know anyone else who's been accused. That's how this spreads, like mold in flour once. They suspect it's there, okay? They see it everywhere. They say you must name others. And here's where the trap tightens. If you give names, they'll accuse you of conspiracy. If you don't, they'll say you're protecting your accomplices. If you name dead people, you're summoning spirits. If you name no one, you're arrogant. If you say nothing, you're damned. That's the witch's paradox. Historians still argue whether these trials served religious aims or social purges. Were they driven by pious terror, by village politics, local jealousies, land grabs? Say it was mass psychosis. Others, an elaborate cover for persecution of the poor, the single, the outspoken. But to you, doesn't matter, because all you know is that your truth is worthless here. There's a fringe tidbit that floats to your mind now, and it makes you smile bitterly. In parts of early modern France, people believed witches could curse butter, not poison it, not spoil it, just make it refuse to churn. The superstition got so bad, people held prayers over their milk buckets, and if butter didn't form, well, guess who got blamed? You remember a time when your butter didn't churn. You thought nothing of it. Now, you wonder if someone was watching. On the third day, they bring in your cousin, the one with the limp. She looks scared. She looks worse when they tell her you accused her. You didn't, but they say you did. And she nods, eyes wide, and says yes, she always thought you were strange. She doesn't want to, but she says it. And now they have two of you by sunset. You are told that you must undergo examination. That means women midwives sworn to the church will inspect your body for a mark, the devil's mark. They're convinced it's there. It could be anything, a mole, a freckle, a birthmark, a scar. Something that does not bleed when pricked. Something numb, something odd. You don't resist. Not because you agree, but because resistance is just another way of confessing. You lie still. Cold hands touch your skin, murmur about a patch behind your knee. You've had it since you were a child. It never itched, but they prod it with a long needle. It doesn't bleed. You don't flinch. See, they say, numb to pain. A sign. You are marked. You are declared guilty, not in court, not in public, but quietly in the back room. With ink on parchment and tired sighs, they say you'll be burned. Of course, because that is the way to cleanse your soul and prevent your spirit from lingering. You must not be buried in the churchyard. You must not be mourned openly. You are a warning, not a memory. Later, someone whispers that there will be a procession, that they will give you one last chance to confess in public. If you do, they promise to strangle you before the flames touch your skin. A mercy, that's the offer. There's one more meal, one more night. This time, they let you pray. You kneel in the straw. You close your eyes, and for the first time in days, the silence no longer scares you, because you realize something. You were never alone in this. So many others, forgotten names, vanished, faces set, where you sit, waited as you wait. Try to be small enough to survive, and still, burned. They don't remember those women, but you do. In this moment, you carry them, and maybe, just maybe, someone, someday, will carry you too. The morning is gray. Not the dramatic kind of gray that comes with thunderclouds or foreshadowing. No, just a dull, listless gray, as if the sky itself can't be bothered to look shocked anymore. It simply is. And you're still here, sitting on the edge of something terrible and inevitable. They come for you before the sun is fully up. No torches, no shouting, just a steady shuffle of boots and the creak of a cart's wooden axle. The guards don't look at you. One offers you a thin wool shawl that's rough, but warmer than you expected. Small gestures like that are almost worse. They remind you, these are people, okay? People with children, with kitchens, with shoes to take off at the end of the day. People who don't even believe the stories, but they still play their part. You're walked out into the village square. It feels smaller now. You've known this place all your life, every stone, every corner. The bench where old Matthew once fell asleep with a mouth full of bread. The apple tree you'd hide behind as a girl, giggling at boys who tried to climb it. And now, a wooden scaffold, freshly built. It's not a proper execution platform, just a simple raised space where they can tie you up high enough for all to see. A message board made of bones and fire. They walk you past the baker's stall. He used to save you the heels of his loaves, said you liked the crunch. Today, he doesn't meet your eyes. His wife grips his arm a little too tightly, and their daughter, perhaps 4 years old, tugs at her apron and says, "Is that the witch?" loud enough to make everyone wince. You don't flinch. There's a small mercy in numbness, like your soul has stepped just slightly outside your body. It's hovering just far enough above to watch it all with a kind of detached quiet. You notice details, the way your feet leave slight prints in the soft dirt, the uneven pattern of the scaffolding nails. It's the faint smell of ash from someone's fireplace lingering in the cold air. They tie your hands loosely at first, then check the knots twice. There's ceremony in it, but no compassion. The priest speaks, not to you, he speaks about you. That's important. You've stopped being a person in this story. You're a moral, a lesson, a symbol. Your name has become shorthand for what happens when you stray. He says things like, she was given chances, and she denied the light. And this is for the safety of our souls. You think about that word, souls, and wonder if yours is already floating somewhere above this village, waiting to see how it ends. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Executions for witchcraft were often public, not just to punish, but to perform. The people needed a show. They needed reassurance that evil had a face and that it could be vanquished. Some trials drew crowds from neighboring towns. Vendors would sell pastries. Children would be lifted onto shoulders to watch. There was even clapping sometimes. You're lucky, or not. This isn't a festival. It's a small village with a small square and a small crowd that can't quite decide whether to be afraid or ashamed. The Inquisitor approaches. You've learned not to expect kindness from him, but now, in this final hour, he seems almost gentle. He asks if you'd like to confess, not for them, not to spare yourself, but, as he puts it, for your eternity. You're tempted, not because you believe, not because you think you'll be forgiven, but because something in you is tired. Because maybe if you say the words, someone got, the villagers, the wind will finally let go. But instead, you say, I helped people. He frowns. That's not the right line. You try again. I tried to ease pain. That's all. There's a pause. He nods, and that's it. No dramatic moment of repentance. No spell shouted in fury. No lightning. No black cat springing from the shadows. Just a woman, tired, standing in the cold, saying she helped. There's a fringe historical tidbit that flickers through your thoughts now. In Iceland, during one particularly strange witch trial in the 17th century, a man was accused of creating a magical pants charm called unbjark, a pair of trousers made from the flayed skin of a dead man's lower half, which, when worn, supposedly brought unlimited wealth. Did he do it? Almost certainly not. But they executed him anyway, 'cause logic had long left the room. You wonder what your pants will be made into? Ash, probably. Dust. They begin stacking the kindling. Dry wood, mostly. Some straw. Enough smoke that you'll be choked before the flames bite too hard. At least, that's the hope. Someone whispers a prayer, and then you see her. A girl, maybe 17, is hidden behind her mother's skirt, peering around with wide eyes. You don't know her name, but you remember her face. You once gave her a willow charm for nightmares. Told her it wouldn't solve anything, but that it might remind her she wasn't alone. She's crying now, not loudly, not wailing. It's tears, silent ones, streaming down as if her face has decided to mourn without permission. It breaks you not for yourself, for her, because you realize this won't stop with you. Historians still argue whether the witch hunts were fueled by actual fear of magic or by the deep-rooted social need to regulate the behavior of women, especially those who didn't conform. Single women, midwives, widows, herbalists, the odd, the quiet, the too smart. You check every one of those boxes, so you're not just being punished for what you did. You're being punished for what you are. They light the torch. The flame crackles slowly. The kindling sighs into smoke. Okay. Feel heat before? You feel pain, and pain before you feel fear. But then something strange happens. You start to float. Not in body, of course, but in memory. Your mind begins to retreat to safer places. It's backward, away from the fire, away from the square. You see your aunt again, laughing as she shows you how to dry lemon balm. You see your younger self, dancing in a summer rainstorm, dress plastered to your knees. You see the smile of the boy who once called you Sonny, even in frost. You see your mother's hands, placing lavender in your pillowcase, and then dash nothing. No more flames, just wind, just air, just silence, again. But this time, soft, and somewhere, far beyond that gray sky, someone remembers your name. Your name disappears from the lips of the living, quicker than you might expect. There is no monument, no plaque, no mass, no grave. The ash from your burning is swept up with yesterday's dust and cast into the wind. By morning, the square has returned to its old self as if nothing happened. Few children draw circles in the dirt. An old woman walks by with a basket of turnips. Dog urinates at the foot of the scaffold post, which still stands, though the rope has been cut away. They always leave the post for a few days. It's not written anywhere, but it's a custom like letting fear linger just long enough for it to root. People pass it without comment, but they look. Every time, just a flick of the eyes. It's just enough to say, we remember what happens when someone steps out of line. You are gone. But the story doesn't stop. The village now knows what to do, what to say, how to whisper accusations softly enough to avoid notice, but loud enough to fan the flames. It only takes a few weeks for another name to float to the surface. This time, it's an old manwan who walks with a hunchback and talks to himself when feeding his chickens. You'd have called it loneliness. They call it summoning dot. And so, the cycle begins again. Here's a mainstream historical fact. During the peak of the European witch hunts, entire communities were ravaged by paranoia. In parts of Germany, entire town councils were arrested and executed under suspicion of being witches. The more who died, the more who were accused. Fear is fertile, and once planted, it doesn't just grow, it overgrows. It's choking out reason, compassion, and memory. Your name becomes a warning. She was clever, like her. They'll say she talked to herbs, too. She walked alone at night. She kept to herself. No one speaks of the time you helped deliver a baby when the midwife was drunk, or the old man whose cough you soothed with mullein tea. or the children you told stories to on festival days. Those memories sink like stones. What floats are the rumors that you cursed a man's cow, that you poisoned the butter, that you flew. The girl, the one who cried at your executions, she keeps quiet. But you live in her dreams now, not as a monster, but as a question. She remembers your smile, your hands, the way you listened, and slowly something stirs in her. Not defiance, not yet, just doubt. That's all it takes. Historians still argue whether children were manipulated into accusing their neighbors, or whether they genuinely believed what they said. In Salem, Massachusetts, in 1692, it was young girls whose testimonies sealed the fates of dozens. Some writhed in fits, claimed to see specters, accused strangers with wide eyes and shaking fingers. Years later, one of them confessed it was all a lie, but by then, the bodies had long been buried. There's a fringe tidbit from Finland that lingers like smoke in a closed room. During a 17th century trial, a woman accused of riding a seal across the sea to meet the devil was found not guilty, not because they believed her innocent, but because they feared she might curse the judge. Sometimes, superstitions save lives in strange ways. Back in your village, the priest gives a sermon the following Sunday. He speaks of sin, of vigilance, of how evil sometimes wears the face of kindness. He never says your name, but everyone knows. That's the power of public punishment. Turns memory into shorthand. Woman who used to buy your salves starts boiling her own now. Poorly. She scalds her hand, blames it on leftover curses in her house. Her husband nods. The inquisitor moves on soon after. He always does. There's a circuit, after all, other villages, other suspicions. He travels with books full of procedures, signs to watch for, sample, confessions, and diagrams of the devil's mark. He says prayers. He wears a clean robe. He eats well, and then, like a shadow under a locked door, he moves on. The scaffold is taken down the same day the next market opens. Coincidence, they'll say. But everyone feels the shift. New wares appear. Spices from the east. Salted fish. A comb carved from horn. The merchant mentions a woman down the road who makes charms for sailors. Someone jokes, better not end up like our last one. They laugh, but it's hollow. The girl who cried starts walking to the forest edge. Not far. Just to the trees. It's just enough to breathe. She remembers the things you told her once, about nettles and bone broth, about hanging rosemary above the door. She picks up a fallen branch and carries it home. Her mother scolds her. Her father watches, in silence. The next day, she returns. Somewhere nearby, a farmer's wife begins to hum a tune you once sang. She doesn't remember the words, just the melody. It clings to her throat like warm honey. Her husband asks what she's humming. She says she doesn't know, but she does. Here's something people forget. When fire burns a body, it doesn't destroy everything. Teeth remain, bone fragments, bits of charcoal that once were someone's breath. Sometimes, if the fire is hot enough, even glass melts. But ash has memory. It finds cracks, settles in soil, becomes part of something else. You're not gone. You're everywhere. In the soup, someone stirs. In the wind that carries the scent of time. In the little scratches the girl makes on her bedroom wall when she wants to remember what her heart is telling her not to forget. The next time someone coughs, they try honey and sage, not because they know what you knew, but because it feels right. And when the moon is high and the sky is particularly dark, a few villagers dream of a woman who smiles kindly and never speaks, but stands among wildflowers. They don't say anything about it in the morning, but they remember. And just like that, quietly, stubbornly, you begin to return, not in body, but in spirit. Not as fear, but as doubt. Doubt grows slower than terror, but it grows deeper, and soon, someone starts asking, what if she was just Good. Another says, what if they were wrong? A third says, nothing but stops going to the sermons. That's how a fire begins too. One spark. Here, in dry air, you were burned. But the ashes still carry embers, and not all of them go out. The seasons roll on. You'd think, after something like, well, that the world would at least pause, take a breath, acknowledge the sheer absurdity of it all. But it doesn't. The world keeps turning. Chickens still need feeding. Roofs still leak. Babies are born, and old people still fall asleep in chairs and forget to wake up. Life persists, not kindly, but relentlessly. Your story, though, doesn't vanish. It lingers, softly, like mold on old bread, like whispers between fence posts. Your name isn't said much aloud anymore, but it lives in the cracks, tucked behind glances and in the hollows of phrases like, she reminds me of, and let's not have another one of those. In every place that suffered a burning, there comes a quiet tension afterward. People know what happened. They don't know what to do with it. They can't talk about it, but they can't forget. So it becomes a kind of silent agreement, okay? A pact made in denial. We'll all pretend this was normal, and maybe it will be. But you, being the inconvenient truth that you are, don't allow that to happen. You keep haunting, not with chains or wailing. Nothing so dramatic. You haunt by being remembered. By becoming the thing they can't quite scrub out of their minds when they look at their own hands and think, I did nothing. You haunt by surviving as regret. That girl, she's older now, still quiet, still thoughtful, still carrying that same worn shawl that used to be yours, passed down through some forgotten gesture. She doesn't say where she got it, and no one asks, but she wraps it around herself like armor when she slips into the woods to pick herbs. Yes, she picks herbs now, not because anyone taught her, but because she notices. She's watched the bees, the bark, a curl of leaves in different light, and she remembers vaguely something you once whispered about, calendula steeped in oil for bruises. She experiments, cautiously. At first, it's just little things. A headache soothed with mint tea, cut that heals quicker when packed with moss. Then, a neighbor's cough that quiets after she brings over a jar of boiled thyme water. No one calls it witchcraft yet, but the word, it hovers. It's just out of reach, because in this time, here's a mainstream historical fact. The line between medicine and magic was razor thin, especially if it came from the hands of a woman. Male physicians trained in monasteries or universities could wield the same remedies and be called learned. But a woman with dirt under her nails and too much knowledge of roots, suspicious. The logic, flimsy. But the fear, is very, very real. Meanwhile, your village begins to fray in strange, subtle ways. Not disasters, just small cracks. The priest starts coughing too much. The inquisitor's next visit is delayed by snow. A merchant brings in a strange relic from the east, a painted charm on a leather strap hand, swears it keeps bad dreams away. He sells out in 2 days. People are still afraid, but now the shape of that fear is shifting. They start locking doors, not from evil outside, but from guilt inside, because the truth, ugly and slow, has begun to spread. Maybe you weren't the monster. Maybe they were. There's a quirky tidbit about a region in early modern Bavaria, where a priest was once accused of accidentally cursing the town by sneezing during a sermon. His sneeze, apparently, coincided with a hailstorm. For weeks, locals tried to bless it back out of him with increasingly awkward rituals. Eventually, they just blamed it on a witch anyway and moved on. People will believe anything when fear is involved. Back to the girl. She's making notes now. Little ones, scratched into the soft bark of birch trees. Symbols more than words. Circles with dots. Shapes that remind her of seeds. Each mark tied to a memory. This soothes to burn. that eased a fever. It's not a grimoire. It's a journal, but give it a few centuries and a suspicious neighbor, and suddenly you've got a book of shadows on your hands. She doesn't talk about you, not directly, but sometimes she sits by that old apple tree, the one you once hid behind as a child, and hums your melody. That melody, the one that keeps surfacing in odd places on a baker's lips while kneading dough. Key in the whistle of a shepherd during long walks. It's everywhere now. No one quite remembers where it came from, only that it feels safe. Historians still argue whether early resistance to witch hunts was organized or merely spontaneous, whether those who quietly defied the Inquisition were radicals or simply exhausted by the carnage. What we know, in certain towns, women started protecting each other, passing warnings, hiding tools, destroying lists of names. Not warriors, not witches, just survivors with no other option. The girl, your shadow, really starts leaving small gifts on doorsteps, bundles of dried herbs tied with twine, no names attached, or requests for coin. Some people accept them, others throw them away, but no one says anything aloud, because they know, deep down, it's you again. Somewhere, a man, one of those who helped tie the knots, gets sick. The village healer won't go near him, claims she's busy, says it without meeting his eyes. He knows why. He doesn't fight it. Eventually, he recovers, but the limp never leaves. They say he walks as if something is pulling at him. It's guilt, of course, but guilt rarely limps, unless it wears boots. Let's not romanticize what comes next. There's no revolution, no glorious uprising, no single moment when the truth breaks free and everything changes. That's not how it works. It's slower, like seeds in frozen soil, like rust beneath paint. But things do change. The priest gets older, weaker. One day, he doesn't show up for mass. A new man arrives months later, younger, less fire and brimstone, a little softer around the edges. He asks people questions instead of telling them answers. The girl, now a young woman, starts walking more openly through the village with her herb satchel. Someone calls her wise instead of witch. That's progress. Taught children start asking questions again. What's this plant? Why does it smell like mint? She answers. And somewhere in all this quiet, slow growth, you begin to bloom again. Not as a ghost, not even as a memory, but as a presence, a force, the echo of a life that refused to vanish. Even when they tried to burn it out of the world, you are now the hush in the air before someone speaks a forbidden truth. You are the cool hand on a fevered brow. You are the breath between laughter and weeping. You are the moment when someone dares to say, maybe she was right. You become something else entirely now. Not a person, not quite a story. More like ... a current, a pull in the atmosphere. The villagers don't speak your name, but they speak around you, in circles, in cautious, coded phrases. The shadow behind every she was always kind, wasn't she? And funny how her remedies worked better than the physicians. You aren't gonna use just to change shape. It starts with a small boy who comes down with a fever. The village healer, brittle with age and fear, shakes her head. He's burning up, she says, helplessly. He may not last the night. His mother, weeping, remembers a little pouch she once found on her doorstep, dried lavender, sage, and something sweet-smelling she couldn't name. She still has it. She puts it beneath his pillow, mostly out of desperation, and dabs a cloth with chamomile water. By morning, he's breathing steadily again. The mother doesn't say anything to anyone, but she visits a certain tree later that week and leaves a fresh apple there, just in case. Mainstream historical fact. This was common, In early modern Europe, people practiced what was called dual faith. Outwardly devout Christians who still left offerings to the old spirits, tied ribbons to trees, whispered charms under their breath. Not because they were heretics, but because they were human. Desperate. Superstition was survival in a world with so few certainties. Back in the village, people start making quiet visits to the woods, alone, always alone. They pluck leaves, whisper questions to the wind, and tuck twigs into their sleeves. You've become a guide now, not with words, but with nudges. A bird call here, a soft breeze there. The sudden feeling that something is right, even if you don't know why. And the girl, now fully grown, and a woman in her own right, still there. She's built something just beyond the edge of town. A little cottage with smoke that smells not of meat or manure, but of flowers and pine and boiling honey. She doesn't advertise what she does, but people come quietly with sick children, ailing livestock, questions they can't ask the priest. She never charges, but her shelves are never empty. Either dot coins show up under baskets, bread appears on her windowsill. One man even leaves a song carved into wood, a thank you from a mute daughter who finally spoke after drinking something he swore smelled like rain. Fringe tidbit: in parts of 16th century France, cunning women were often tolerated, even protected by their communities, as long as they didn't boast. It was a tightrope walk. Heal too well, and you're a threat. Fail to heal, and you're a fraud. But stay quiet, kind, and unthreatening. You just might survive. That's what your girl has learned. Kindness without pride. Power without arrogance. She's careful, always careful. But still, they watch. Especially the priest. The new one isn't like the last. He's gentler, yes, but not blind. He sees the people skipping confession, the way they murmur thanks, not to saints, but to trees. He visits the woman. She welcomes him with tea. They talk. He leaves with a jar of nettle, tonic, and eyes full of confusion. Because here's what he finds. Someone doing good. Quietly, humbly, effectively. And yet, isn't that what you did? He's read the records. He knows what happened to you. And something in his stomach churns. That's the power of you, even long dead. You plant discomfort in those who wish for simple answers. Historians still argue whether priests and inquisitors ever truly believed all the accusations they acted upon. Some were fanatics, yes, but others, bureaucrats, cowards, men who chose silence over risk. Some likely did believe at first, but belief tends to crack under the weight of burning bodies. Time moves like water, now smooth and slow. Seasons change, the village grows, children become parents. Fields are planted and reaped, and still, you're there, in every blossom of feverfew, in every bottle of mead left uncorked by the hearth, in every lullaby that starts. There once was a woman who knew the wind's name. You're not a ghost, you're a legacy. One day, a merchant brings news from the city, a new law, softer penalties, fewer burnings. The people pretend they're surprised, but inside, they feel the shift. The inquisitor never returns. Another mainstream fact: by the late 1700s, Cudes, witch hunts in Europe had sharply declined. Science, enlightenment, thinking, and public fatigue all played a role. Courts required stronger evidence. Spectral accusations no longer held sway. In some places, it became downright embarrassing to suggest witches were real. But the memory, the trauma, that lingers. There's a hill now, just beyond the village, where wild thyme grows in thick, unruly patches. No one planted it, just appeared, one spring, right where your ashes once scattered. The girl, now older, with silver in her hair visits it often. She doesn't cry anymore. She listens, and sometimes she hears you in the rustle of the stalks, in the heat of the sun on her face, in the comfort of knowing that she survived because you showed her how. she's not the only one either. There are more like her now, in other villages, the valleys. Women and some men who walk paths less traveled, who gather strange things and brew stranger things, who know how to speak softly to animals and louder to the moon. They don't call themselves witches, not usually, but others do. Only now, it's said, with a smile. Sometimes, even with awe. It's funny how the word once meant death and now means knowledge. Quirky detail in modern Iceland. Over 50% of the population admits they might believe in elves. Roads have been redirected to avoid disrupting hidden folk dwellings. You can burn a woman at the stake for talking to plants. But centuries later, the same culture builds highways around invisible beings in rocks. Go figure. Back in your village, no one builds a statue for you. No one names a festival in your honor, but your tree still stands. Your melody still lingers, and once a year, someone always a different person leaves a bundle of lavender and rosemary tied with a red ribbon at the foot of the old gallows post. There's number sign, no speech, just the gesture. It's enough, because in the end, what matters is that they remember. They remember what fear did. They remember who you were. And slowly, steadily, the world heals not by forgetting, but by holding on to the right pieces of you. By now, you've become more than a memory. You're a caution, a whisper, a parable, something told in low tones by firelight when the world feels unstable again, when the crops fail, when a child vanishes, when the wind sounds just a little too human. They don't always say your name, but they say your story, bent and reshaped with each telling. Of course, sometimes you were old, sometimes young. Sometimes you had eyes like fire, or walked with a limp, or spoke in riddles, but the core always stays the same. You were clever, you were kind, and you were burned for it. What surprises you most is how that legacy sticks, not in the churches or the courts, but in the kitchens, the herb gardens, the songs. There's a woman now in the village, not the girl from before, but her daughter. She wears her hair short and has an irreverent laugh that makes even the sternest elders smile in spite of themselves. She brews teas that taste like spring rain, and she's learning how to read properly, not just charms and recipes, but big books full of long words, astronomy, anatomy, something called chemistry. You would have loved it. She keeps a little notebook, bound in leather, where she copies down things she learns. How to identify the best bark for making salicylate reliever. What time of day your body produces the most melatonin, whatever that is. And a note that says, toads do not cure colds. Stop asking. Mainstream historical fact. In the 18th and 19th centuries, women in rural communities often served as both informal doctors and midwives, drawn from traditional knowledge passed down through generations. These women were rarely literate, but their legacy shaped early public health efforts, even as male physicians sought to push them aside. But here's the twist. Your new apprentice. She's writing it all down because she knows how quickly stories can be taken, erased, burned, and she knows what happened to you, not the child-friendly version, but the real thing. She found your name in the parish book once, a single entry, convicted, executed, heresy. No mention of the 12 people you healed, no mention of the girl you saved. Just 2 cold words, convicted, executed. But she writes you back into the world anyway. She's careful though, always careful. Even now, centuries after the flames died out, the embers glow in people's minds. There's an old widow in town, boned, thin and leathery, with a face that's all angles. She remembers her grandmother whispering, "Don't pick flowers after dark." That's when she walks, meaning you. She still believes it, in her way. Won't cross the fields past sundown. Carries salt in her apron pocket. You don't mind? There's a certain charm in being feared just enough to stay respected. You never wanted to be a martyr, Understood. Still, it stings sometimes, doesn't it? That the same things that once doomed you are now the stuff of bedtime, rhymes, and marketing gimmicks. There's a bakery in the nearby town that sells witches' brewed tea cakes, honey, thyme, lemon zest, and just a whisper of ginger. They're delicious. But part of you winces. The villagers don't burn people anymore, of course. That era is long gone, or is it? Because here comes the tricky part, the modern part. A traveling preacher stops in the village. Not a cruel man, at least. Not openly. But he's got that glint in his eye, that confidence, that belief that he knows better. He sees the woman's notebooks, hears rumors about teas that cure headaches, salves that close wounds faster than expected. He doesn't like it. He calls a gathering, speaks in loud, righteous tones about the dangers of straying from the path. He doesn't say your name, but he says, enough. The young woman listens, smiles politely, doesn't speak. She's learned your lesson. Survival is often about silence. But when she gets home, she writes in her notebook, preacher believes knowledge equals sin. Must be careful, but also consider teaching others secretly. Just like that spark you lit centuries ago flares again. Quirky tidbit: in parts of 19th century Germany, so-called granny witches or Hexenmeister were consulted in secret by entire community, even as they were officially frowned upon. People feared being seen, but not enough to stop coming. One documented case describes a woman who hid under blankets while receiving a foot massage with herb oil, so the priest wouldn't see her soul leaving through her toes. Human logic is beautifully bizarre. Your girl, the new one, finds ways to share what she knows. She pretends she's just gossiping or chatting about cooking or helping tidy up after harvest, but she slips things in: tips, remedies, quiet ideas, because fear, you've learned, never truly dies. It just changes shape. One season, a harsh sickness sweeps through the region. People panic. The traveling preacher blames unclean habits. Someone else mutters that it's punishment for letting women lead. Your girl, she starts boiling pine needles for steam inhalation. She hangs elderflower bundles in doorways. She works all night, softly, tirelessly. People recover. This time, no one dares complain. They just leave bread and letters at her door. Some of them say thank you. Some say nothing, just tuck violets or thyme into the folds of her windowsill. And one, you remind me of someone. A story my mother told me about a woman who danced barefoot in storms and knew when babies would be born just by touching their mother's hands. You, they mean you, and you feel it like warmth, like breath, like a string pulled gently across the centuries. You are still here, not in body, not even in voice, but in echo. Historians still argue whether early medicine women laid the foundation for modern nursing and midwifery, or whether their contributions were overwritten by male-led institutions. Some claim it's impossible to trace. Others say the link is obvious if you know where to look. Your new heir doesn't care much for academic school arguments. She just keeps working. She writes a letter to a woman in a neighboring village who's been accused of unchristian practices for making her own soap and teaching young girls about herbs. The letter reads, "You are not alone. I see you. I'll help." The network grows quietly, carefully, but unmistakably. They trade books, recipes, letters with coded language. They meet in gardens, under moonlight, in barns, in bakeries. They joke and laugh and cry and learn. And none of them call themselves witches because they don't need to. There's something older, wiser, something you would have recognized instantly. One day, your tree falls in a storm. The villagers mourn not loudly, but with reverence. They gather the wood. They don't burn it, okay? They carve it into charms, walking sticks, handles for kitchen knives, okay? They plant a circle of saplings in its place, and your girl places your real name into the hollow of one of those young trees, not carved, just whispered, because she knows you'll hear it, and you do, always. Now, the story takes an unexpected turn, because you might think the worst is behind you, right? The Middle Ages ended. The fires died down. Superstition gave way to science, and the world marched bravely forward, armed with microscopes and stethoscopes. But you know better. The past isn't a closed book. It's a living shadow that stretches its fingers into the present. Imagine this. The 20th century rolls in, all shiny new technology and promises of progress. Radios crackle, cars roar, and people begin flying in machines that seem to defy the heavens. You might assume you're kind women who dared to heal, who dared to know who'd finally be safe. But no, you're still being watched, still being feared. The witch trials may have slowed, but the paranoia shifted shape. It found new targets, women who questioned social norms, who refused to bow to patriarchal authority, who delved into alternative medicine and psychology. Sometimes it wore a white coat and carried a clipboard. Other times it hid behind a scientific study or a news headline warning of cults. You would have recognized the pattern. Your descendants, those women in secret gardens, those midwives with herbal tinctures, faced renewed suspicion. The modern world branded them charlatans or quacks. In some places, it even labeled their knowledge as dangerous, unproven, or backward. Yet, the hunger for the old ways didn't die. You can still see it in the underground magazines, the whispered meetings in city basements, the flourishing of New Age fairs where crystals, tarot cards, and ancient herbal recipes mingle with the scent of incense. This isn't some accidental revival. It's the echo of you, traveling through time, resisting erasure. Mainstream historical fact. During the 20th century, particularly the 1960s and 1970s, the feminist movement reclaimed witchcraft and herbalism as symbols of female empowerment and resistance to patriarchal systems. The witch movement intertwined spirituality, feminism, and ecology, reviving centuries-old practices in new contexts. One fascinating detail, in 1963, the publication of Witchcraft Today by Gerald Gardner sparked the modern Wiccan movement, which blends folklore, pagan traditions, a celebration of nature's powers, some of which traces directly back to the suppressed knowledge of your kind. But it's not all peaceful spells and dancing around maypoles. Sometimes, the shadows of fear still flicker. The witch hunt today might not end in flames, but it can take subtler, more insidious forms: social ostracism, misinformation campaigns, or outright bans on traditional healing practices. You'd recognize the signs: fear of what's misunderstood, fear of what challenges the dominant order, and it's a complicated legacy, because, on one hand, these modern witches wield power you could never have imagined: community networks that span continents, online forums sharing recipes and rituals, activist groups fighting for environmental justice and women's rights. On the other hand, they're still battling prejudice that your burning made all too clear. There's a kind of resilience, Hera, stubborn flame refusing to be snuffed out. Picture a woman today, sitting in a sunlit kitchen somewhere far from your old village. She's mixing herbs, not because she wants to start a war with modern medicine, but because she believes in balance. She has a shelf full of books, both scientific and ancient. She calls herself a healer, a herbalist, maybe even a witch. She might not know your name, but she walks in your footsteps. Her grandmother told her stories. She's heard about the burning times, the fear, the loss. She's felt the weight of that history. Even if it's buried beneath layers of family lore and cultural amnesia, she feels a kinship, quirky tidbit, in modern-day Italy. There are communities where strige, the local word for witches, still practice traditional healing and folk magic openly, sometimes even receiving tourists eager to experience the mysterious. These modern streets walk a fine line between preservation and commercialization, embodying the paradox of ancient knowledge in a postmodern world. The world has changed, but the fear of the other, the fear of women who claim knowledge and power, still lingers. You'd probably chuckle if only to keep from crying how history repeats itself, with new costumes and new names. And yet, the cycle is breaking, because knowledge is power, and every time someone chooses curiosity over fear, every time a woman shares a healing recipe without shame, every time a community honors the earth and the old stories, that flame flickers a little brighter. You're still part of this, still alive in the stories told beneath breathless moonlight, in gardens where herbs grow wild, in songs sung softly at dawn. And the world, it's still learning, still arguing whether those burned in the Middle Ages were victims or heroes, criminals or wise women, still trying to understand the truth hidden beneath the ashes. And maybe, just maybe, that's the greatest magic of all. The flame flickers, but it doesn't die out. You've traveled through centuries of smoke and silence, carrying stories like embers passed from hand to hand. Now, in the quiet corners of the modern world, the legacy you left is blossoming anew, often in unexpected ways. You find yourself in the midst of a strange and wonderful era, one of instant communication, global travel, and endless information where anyone can search the stars or their own DNA with a few clicks. Yet, paradoxically, this abundance breeds uncertainty and, sometimes, fear. You see women and men alike turning back to old knowledge, ancient remedies, herbal lore, and rituals as antidotes to a world that often feels cold, disconnected, and rushed. And you think, finally, someone listens. But the modern world is complicated. It doesn't just offer acceptance, it offers conflict. There's a fine line between respect for tradition and the commercialization that twists sacred knowledge into trendy fads. It's a line your new heirs tread carefully. They know how quickly respect can turn into ridicule, how quickly power can be commodified. Some healers sell their potions in sleek bottles with Instagram-worthy labels. Others teach workshops in forest clearings under a full moon. Some publish books, while others hide behind anonymous blogs. A tapestry of voices, sometimes harmonious, sometimes discordant. And the old fear, it lurks in unexpected places, in lawsuits against midwives who practice outside official medicine, in online mobs accusing women of quackery because they reject big pharma, in debates over intellectual property, where corporations patent ancient remedies that once belonged to no one and everyone. The tension between progress and preservation is palpable. Mainstream historical fact, the global resurgence of herbal medicine in the late 20th and early 21st centuries led to the World Health Organization formally recognizing traditional medicine practices in 2002. This was a landmark move, acknowledging centuries-old knowledge as valuable to global health systems. Yet, it sparked debates about regulation, safety, and cultural appropriation. You'd find this fascinating. Many modern witches and herbalists advocate fiercely for sustainability and environmental protection. They remind us that long before pollution and industrial waste, their ancestors understood the delicate balance between humans and nature. One activist recently said in a speech, "Our knowledge is not just about healing people, but healing the planet. To forget our roots is to forget our responsibility." You see this same passion mirrored in grassroots movements across the globe. Women planting community gardens, preserving heirloom seeds, crafting natural remedies from wild plants. They aren't just preserving history, they're fighting for the future. And yet, not everyone sees it that way. Sometimes, your heirs encounter suspicion from the medical establishment, which demands proof in clinical trials that can be prohibitively expensive and slow. Other times, they face cultural backlash from conservative groups who see any departure from orthodox religion or medicine as dangerous. Remember how you were silenced by fire? Now, The silencing is more subtle. Social media bans, censorship, dismissal as pseudoscience. But here's the irony. The very technology used to suppress alternative voices also empowers them. The internet is a double-edged sword, a vast library in a noisy marketplace all at once. Anyone with a smartphone can learn to identify herbs, share recipes, or connect with like-minded souls across continents. At the same time, misinformation spreads like wildfire, and trolls lie in wait. Your modern heir knows how to navigate this landscape. She's savvy. She reads the algorithms. She knows when to speak and when to listen. She builds communities where empathy and knowledge flow freely, where no one is burned for asking questions or seeking answers. She's part scientist, part sage, part rebel. You'd recognize her immediately. One night, she writes in her journal, "The world still fears what it doesn't understand. But I carry the fire not to burn, but to illuminate." Quirky tidbit: in some parts of Scandinavia, modern witches have started offering virtual healing sessions, combining ancient runes and herbal wisdom with cutting-edge technology like augmented reality and AI. Clients attend from around the world, seeking guidance without ever leaving their couches. It's witchcraft meets Silicon Valley, and it's surprisingly effective for community building. The world's opinions may still clash, but your legacy keeps evolving. It lives in the quiet power of healing hands, in the whispered prayers over a steaming cup of tea, and the resilience of those who dare to know. Historians still argue whether the commercialization of folk medicine ultimately helps preserve traditions or dilutes their meaning into consumer culture. Some see it as a survival strategy. Others fear it erodes authenticity. But your story, your real story, doesn't hinge on scholarly debates. It's about survival, connection, and the courage to carry light into the darkest places. The story you began with smoke and fire has transformed into something richer, woven into the fabric of countless lives, shaping a world that is still learning to balance fear with understanding. And so, the flame burns on. The journey you've been on tonight is almost over. But before we close, let's slow down, breathe in the quiet. After all that smoke and flame, you've traveled through centuries of fear, silence, rebellion, and resilience. And now, here you are, a world where the past and present intertwine in the most unexpected ways. You might still wonder, why were you burned? Why did fear turn to fire so easily? The answer is tangled in human nature itself, in the uneasy dance between power and knowledge, between the seen and the unknown. In the Middle Ages, to be different was dangerous. To heal outside the sanctioned means, to wield knowledge that wasn't officially yours, was to challenge the entire social order, and people feared what they couldn't control. But here's the whisper beneath the roar. That fire was never just about punishment. It was about silencing a truth too powerful to be allowed free speech. The knowledge women held, the connection they had to nature, the ways they healed bodies and minds. These threatened structures built on ignorance and fear, and you, whoever you were, became a symbol, a scapegoat, a beacon of forbidden power. Yet, as we've seen, that flame didn't erase you. It forged you anew in stories, in dreams, quiet acts of defiance that echo to this day. Your spirit lives on in every whispered herb remedy, in every reclaimed ritual, in every person who dares to seek wisdom beyond textbooks and white coats. Even now, the world is still learning how to balance fear with curiosity, suspicion with wonder. Mainstream historical fact: modern scholars agree that the so-called witch hunts of the early modern period were complex social phenomena fueled not only by superstition, but also by economic, political, and religious upheaval. They weren't merely about witches, but about control, power, and the suppression of marginalized voices. One little-known detail: in some regions, People who had been accused and survived would form secret societies, passing on their knowledge underground. These groups, sometimes called healer circles, maintained herbal lore and healing arts through generations, deliberately avoiding official scrutiny. Some argued that these circles helped preserve much of the old wisdom that resurfaced. Centuries later, you probably wouldn't want to be a part of that society, not if it meant hiding, fearing every knock at the door. But those who survived were fierce. They adapted, shifted shapes like shadows in moonlight, kept their knowledge alive so it could bloom again. Quirky tidbit: in 2019, archaeologists discovered a medieval herb garden beneath a former convent in England, complete with plants known for their healing and protective properties, exactly the kinds of plants you might have tended in secret. It's like history itself is trying to remind us that the knowledge you carried was real, grounded in the earth, not just superstition. Historians still argue whether the myth of the witch obscures or illuminates the realities of medieval women's roles in medicine and spirituality. Some say the label oversimplifies a diverse array of practices, while others see it as a powerful metaphor for female resilience and forbidden knowledge. What matters most is what you take away from this story. You've seen how fear can corrupt, how ignorance can burn, but you've also seen how knowledge, courage, and community can kindle light even in the darkest times. So, as you lay back now, feeling the weight of history settle softly around you, remember this: the fire didn't destroy you, it transformed you. You are the quiet healer with the whispered wisdom, the flickering flame that refuses to go out. Turn off the lights, grab a cozy blanket, and rest easy, because the journey we share tonight is just one thread in a tapestry woven across time, one that continues to grow stronger, and shine brighter with each passing day. Thank you for traveling with me. Sweet dreams.